Hello out there. Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan, and together we are going through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year, a little bit every day. Today we're going to be reading Genesis 26:13 through 22. I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we'll discuss what we read. And the man became ever greater until he was very great. And he had possessions of flocks and of herds and many slaves, and the Philistines envied him. And all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines blocked up, filling them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you have grown far too powerful for us." And Isaac went off from there and encamped in the Wadi of Gerar and dwelled there. And Isaac dug anew the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had blocked up after Abraham's death. And he gave them names like the names his father had called them. And Isaac's servants dug in the wadi, and they found there a well of fresh water. And the shepherds of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's shepherds, saying, "The water is ours." And he called the name of the well Esek, for they had contended with him. And they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too, and he called its name Sitnah. And he pulled up stakes from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, and he called its name Rehoboth, and said, "For now the Lord has given us space, that we may be fruitful in the land." All right, so this is a short little segment. It's not a story, honestly, I can recall ever spending a lot of time thinking about, because it's one of those things that's easily read over. But it is very interesting to see what happens here. So you have Isaac is blessed, right? And then immediately the culture around him is very resentful of him and even sabotaging, it seems like, what he used for his agricultural purposes. So it just goes to show, how resentment, people, wanting what somebody else has can, yield such a sinful result. And ultimately, he's driven away. And then there's these constant bickerings with different people over these wells. So that's very interesting. What do you make of this section?
Remember that this land was promised to Abraham, but God told him, for a time you're going to be strangers in this land, and you're going to be oppressed. And so this is fulfillment of that prophecy.
Right.
While the patriarchs were in that land, there were ups and downs. It was not really a secure environment for them, and that's why the 400 years includes that part. It's not just Egypt, but when they were even in their own land, it was their own land potentially, but at that point, they were a minority, and so they were vulnerable. And it is interesting that you find in history minorities that do well, and then they get resented. This happens with Jews. It happens with, I think, Chinese in Southeast Asia. You have certain minority groups that when they do well, then those around them get resentful about it. So there's something, a pattern in history, I think you'll see.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's interesting is, again, not that everything is, but a lot of Isaac is Christology sort of stuff, right? So you have him digging anew wells of water. So again, you kind of have almost like the wineskins concept, right? That he has to start over with a new patch of water. I don't know. I find that kind of interesting there, that parallelism going on there. I also think it's interesting that it specifically talks about the names that he gives the wells names like his father called them, and that's interesting because that just puts such a significance on it. Now, obviously, wells have a lot of significance in that region. It's dry. You need to store up water. There's periods of time when you're relying on them, and then to give it a name, like a specific name to that well. It's interesting. It's culturally and maybe not something that sounds that similar to what we do, although some people name their car and things like that. But generally speaking, we don't do that as much. So it is interesting to see that. And then, of course, we have a bunch of situations where the names are going to reflect what happened, which is similar to what we get later in like the wilderness, where they reach places and then they call it whatever because of the story, of what took place there.
In verse 21, he calls the name of the place Sitna, which would mean like opposition. Is the root is the same word for Satan in the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, Satan is the adversary. So you have here Eshek, and then you have Sitna. And finally, did we get to Rehovot? Yeah, in the reading, wide areas. So
Yeah,
Rehovot are wide areas, and so now he's finally got some relief. And is that where we ended the reading?
that is where we end the reading.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for now
So
the Lord
so
has given us
it ends.
space.
So it does end on a positive note in that sense.
Yeah,
So the Philistines, we saw the positive side. Now we see the negative, this
right.
negative side of the Philistines, and you're going to see a lot of negative side of the Philistines as you keep going through the Bible.
Yeah. Well, one thing you get too is just the kind of you can't win for losing, right? Because you have Abraham, you have the Jewish people and they're incredibly successful and everybody's really angry at them. Then you have later that they're slaves and they don't want to give them an inch because they're so low, right? So it's like either way it's just not going to work out very well for you,
Yeah.
but it does tend to be that way just with biblically minded people in general. You're either biblically minded and you're successful and then people are envious of your success, or you're not very successful and they're belittling you for the fact that your way of life hasn't yielded success. So it's like in this world you don't really have much of a victory waiting for you, and that's just the way it has to be. So all right. One thing that Robert Alter pointed out, which is kind of interesting, is that wells, as opposed to land, are not really something you can divide up easily. So it does make sense that you could have these quarrels that are kind of unsolvable because you have to just keep moving, because ultimately what do? You can't like give somebody half of a well in the same way that you can with a field. So you really do have to reach a point where it's big enough that there isn't this squabble, which
Yeah.
is it's just from a practical purpose, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Mhm.
All right, any other thoughts about this?
No, we're going to continue on.
We're going to continue on. That's right. And if you want to continue on with us, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, share this feed with others, because, this is a good year to read the law together. So let's do it. And we will see you tomorrow.